Hey all, Ron here from Military Images Magazine with a new episode of Life on the Civil War Research Trail. It can be fairly said that Civil War soldier stories are like fingerprints. No two are the same, and they're filled with surprises and twists. Here's one that begins with Confederate First Lieutenant Nimrod Sullivan's capture after the Battle of Gettysburg and ends on the streets of New York City. Let's begin in Maryland, about 10 days after the end of the fighting at Gettysburg. Two divisions of exhausted and hungry Confederate infantrymen spent a miserable night trudging through the Maryland countryside in a torrential rain, bogged down in mud and muck up to their knees. Soon after daylight on July 14th, 1863, the men halted near the Potomac River at Falling Waters. They stacked arms and fell asleep. According to one officer, quote, before long, a body of cavalry were discovered approaching from the direction we had just left. They carried the stars and stripes of the United States, but the color of their uniforms seemed to be Confederate, and their manner of moving by the flank and leisurely confirmed all in the belief that they were our own cavalry, end quote. Well, they were wrong. The material of their mud-spattered uniforms was Yankee blue. The Federals quickly deployed in line of battle and rushed the weary infantrymen. Many became casualties in the fast and ferocious fight that ensued, including the soldier pictured here, First Lieutenant Nimrod Sullivan. 34-year-old Sullivan had left his family in Anderson Courthouse, South Carolina, 2 years earlier, and joined the Army as a second lieutenant in an outfit originally known as the Mountain Boys. It became Company C of the 1st South Carolina Rifles, also known as Orr's Rifles. In the spring of '62, Sullivan departed with his regiment for Virginia and there received a promotion to first lieutenant. He went on to fight in all the regiment's major battles, including Chancellorsville, where it lost almost half its number. Just a month later at Gettysburg, commanders held Orr's Rifles in reserve while the rest of its brigade participated in the attack that drove the Federal First Corps from the grounds of the Lutheran Seminary and through town on the first day of the battle. During the withdrawal after Gettysburg, the South Carolinians and the rest of the retreating army of Northern Virginia became trapped on the Maryland side of the Potomac River, which had been made impassable by heavy rains. The waters receded enough to allow the crossing by pontoon bridge spanning the river at a place called Falling Waters after dark on July 13th. The next morning, on the 14th, the Confederate rear guard, which included Sullivan and his regiment, were caught unaware by that surprise attack by those leisurely-looking Union soldiers covered in mud in their spattered uniforms. It was an eyewitness who recalled, quote, the enemy, the Yankee cavalry, dashed in, firing pistols and sabering everything in their way. The din was horrible, the confusion inextricable. There was fighting, flying, shouting, robbing dead men all at once. Finally, the enemy retired with a small loss. It was a most unfortunate affair, end quote. A number of the men were captured, the South Carolinians, after all they had gone through, after the mud and muck, trying to make their way back to Virginia. Among those captured was Sullivan. He wasn't alone. He and many others were sent to prisons. Sullivan spent the next 2 years in captivity. First, he went to Baltimore, and then he was sent to Johnson's Island in Ohio. He gained his release only after agreeing to sign the oath of allegiance to the Constitution. That was in June of 1865, after the fighting was over in the Eastern and Western theaters. According to one of Sullivan's cousins, he made his way to New York City. By the time he got there, He was dressed in ragged clothing, barefoot, and long haired. It's hard to imagine in New York City, imagine the rail cars, the people in fancy dress, newsboys selling newspapers and trinkets, women with parasols, all moving through the city, the big buildings. And here's Sullivan looking bedraggled, looking like he lost his best friend in the world. And here he is on the streets of New York City when miraculously he's recognized despite the long hair and his unkempt condition. Someone recognizes him, comes up to him, and introduces himself. It turns out that it was an old friend and business acquaintance from down in South Carolina. What a chance meeting. The friend had some money and he arranged for Sullivan to get a shave, a haircut, get cleaned up, get some new clothes. The friend also gave Sullivan some advice. Goes like this: Nimrod, he said, I want you to go back to Anderson and open up your mercantile business. A great day is ahead for business in the South. Sullivan reportedly replied, but I have no money. Everything that I had has been swept away. Well, the friend had some bucks and he offered to underwrite the business and give him some credit. Sullivan thought about it, probably not too long, and took up his friend on the generous offer, went back to Anderson, to his family, and started a store called Sullivan Hardware Company. Sullivan lived until 1881, dying at age 51 of a heart attack. His wife and 4 children carried on the family business. So thanks for listening to the story of Nimrod Sullivan of Orr's Rifles, his capture after the Battle of Gettysburg, his imprisonment in Baltimore and Johnson's Island, and then winding up on the streets of Gettysburg, where he met an old friend who helped him out. Thanks for listening. We'll see you on the next episode of Life on the Civil War Research Trail.